Every 40 seconds, Calico, one person around the world commits suicide. Economic and Social Survey Jamaica 2019 showed the total number of suicides for that year was 58. The total number of suicides in Jamaica for the year 2018 was 60. And in the month of Suicide Prevention Day and the month of September, we acknowledge suicide awareness, and a lot of people have been having suicidal ideations or, have known persons who have committed suicide or may yourself be thinking about it and thinking about all that is happening with COVID-19, all that COVID-19, this pandemic has brought with it, a lot of devastation, a lot of loss. And though many of us have not experienced a lot of this loss directly, there are many persons that are grappling with a lot of, loss of job, house, family members. And so it can be a bit overwhelming for some persons. I came across some information with which I would like to share, and every 40 seconds, Calico, one person around the world commits suicide. Every 40 seconds, one person around the world commits suicide. Globally, suicide racks up a grim toll of close to 800,000 deaths each year. The Economic and Social Survey Jamaica 2019 showed the total number of suicides for that year was 58. The total number of suicides in Jamaica for the year 2018 was 60. Locally, it is seen that more males committed suicide, with the percentage being 87.9%. According to the police, up to September 7, there had been 29 cases of suicide in the island this year, with 26 of them being males. A 2019 U report pioneered by UNICEF showed that 42% of attempted suicide treated at Jamaican hospitals are children. And when I, saw and read these figures, I thought it important to talk about this in detail. This year's Suicide Prevention Day theme was working together to prevent suicide, and it was observed on September 10th, and I had mentioned it. And I said to myself, I wanted to dig a bit deeper to get a better understanding of suicide, suicidal thoughts. Who do you call? To whom do you turn? What are the symptoms or the signs rather? And what can we do to help? Can we help as individuals? Should we get professional help? And so I decided to look to a gentleman by the name of Dr. Donovan Thomas. He is the president and founder of Choose Life International, national representative for International Association for Suicide Prevention. And he's also the author of a book titled Confronting Suicide, Helping Teens at Risk. Let me just tell you a little bit about Choose Life International. They are a faith-based, non-governmental organization. It was registered in Jamaica in June 2008, and it was founded by Dr. Donovan Thomas and his wife, Faith. Dr. Thomas is my very special guest on Miss Kitty Live on a Mushy Make on Monday afternoon. Dr. Thomas, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Miss Kitty. Good to be with you. May I begin by just conveying our condolences on the passing of your beloved parent this past week. We are in sympathy with you, and we trust that you are recovering well and that you're coping well with this passing.
Thank you so very much, Doc, for your thought and your kind words. And yes, I'm indeed coping and praying and continue riding on the grace of God. And right. So, there are many people.
Just in case there's any complication with our listeners, we just want to clarify that it's not by suicide.
Not at all. Not at all. Natural causes, yes. But I thought, Doc, that last week we spoke about suicide prevention. And I know that many persons in Jamaica, sometimes we talk about suicide with, scant regard or judgment, and a lot of people are very harsh with when this topic or this issue arises. So I want you to tell me a little bit about the work that you do in this field and what are some of your observations as it pertains to suicide.
Okay, my wife and I started Choose Life International 12 years ago. October 1 will be 12 years. My background, I served as the National Director of Youth for Christ for 14 years. Before that, I volunteered for another 16 years. And while working as National Director of Youth for Christ, I did a survey and discovered that 1 in 4 of the Jamaican teenagers seriously thought about taking their own lives.
Yes.
I said, as a youth worker and as a Christian youth worker, we should find answers. And so I set out to do some more research. Finally did my doctoral dissertation on confronting suicidal propensity among Jamaican teenagers, and it is from that the book has arisen.
Yes.
So what we want to establish is that, yes, indeed, people are hurting.
Yes.
What the stats you have shared there showed that in 2018, 1 person, 5 persons in a month took their lives. And we realize that there are, for every person that dies by suicide, at least another 25 attempts. And for every person that dies by suicide, at least 135 are left to grieve.
Yes.
Over 100 million people around the world are impacted by suicide annually. That's a vast number of persons impacted. But little Jamaica, land we love, is not spared from that.
Yes.
We have seen suicide among children.
Yeah.
We were all shocked recently when it was alleged that an 8-year-old died by suicide.
Yes.
And we find it among the teenagers and young adults, and also right across the age spectrum, but highest among the elderly.
Yes.
So the rate of suicide is considered, per 100,000, and the highest rate is among the elderly. Go ahead.
Some persons, Doc, will say that, an 8-year-old or a teenager committing suicide, and we've often heard about them and these cases, and they will say, but them a picnic, them not pay no bills, they have no responsibilities. Based on your research, what are some of the reasons for which persons have committed suicide or at least attempted? What does your research show?
All right. What I've discovered is that there are a lot of unresolved conflicts. So when we think about struggles in the context of home, we find teenagers having conflict with parents. When I did my research some years ago and looked through the records at the University Hospital of the West Indies, I realized that the trigger was really conflict between child and the mother. We also realized...
sorry, Doc, child and the?
And the mother.
Yeah, child and the mother, okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so conflict. Then death and loss of status, loss of the opportunity to be a part of a sports team, death of loved ones, passing of grandmother, those things can trigger. We also realize that sometimes teenagers do things and they end up feeling guilty.
Yes.
When they are not dealt with appropriately. I'm not talking about beating up on them or anything like that. Sometimes they feel that they deserve punishment and they choose to punish themselves. And
yes.
I realize that sometimes their punishment can be more drastic. We also realize that even children and of course teenagers experience broken love affair.
Mm-hmm.
So especially when they have become sexually involved and the relationship breaks up, the trauma that they go through is similar to what adults go through during the divorce proceeding.
Yes.
There is also high molestation at home.
Wow.
And in the context of the lockdown, in the context of isolation, in the context of stay at home, it's greater incidence of molestation at home.
Yes.
We don't have the stats yet in Jamaica, but other countries are showing that. Sometimes teenagers hurt themselves, and these are females now who have become pregnant and they don't want to face the reality, afraid to face their parents, afraid to face the world, feel that their whole future is gone,
yes.
slighted, so to speak.
The embarrassment and the shame.
Yeah. And sometimes they deal with revenge. Many times when children and teenagers are hurt and they want to get back at people because of their powerlessness, instead of trying to hurt the person that has offended them, they turn it in on themselves, and the person who has hurt them is supposed to feel responsible.
Yes. Yeah.
My research way back when, over 20 years now, actually spoke to social isolation. And many of us can actually identify with that in the context in which we live and operate today. The absence of secure relationship with a parent figure in childhood may have long-term consequences on a teenager's ability to establish lasting relationships.
Yes.
We are created for relationships. In fact, what we are finding out is that where there is poor adult-child relationship, and the adult could be parents or just anybody else in general, where there is healthy, positive relationship, where there is poor adult-child relationship, the suicide risk tends to be higher. And the research is also showing that even after the individual has passed childhood years, if positive relationships are not formed with adults during the childhood years, their vulnerability to suicide goes even beyond their childhood years.
Oh, wow.
So there are those kinds of things we see coming out. Sometimes teenagers and children live under difficult conditions. They want to escape these unpleasant realities. We still have children being left and their parents gone abroad and leave them with friends or friend or friend and friend.
Yes.
And sometimes they end up in unpleasant situations.
Yes. And sometimes suffer from a feeling of abandonment.
Abandonment, yes. Sometimes they kill themselves as a means of reuniting with deceased loved ones. The grandma is gone to heaven. Children may say, "Oh, I want to go to heaven too.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be with the only person I was sure loved me."
Yes.
One young lady said, "My deceased father," as she attempted suicide back then.
So let me just ask you, Doc, because we're listening to all the information, and for some people it may be eye-opening because we've never really thought about suicide like that. As I've said, sometimes we've heard about it because of our culture, we turn our back on it or we scoff at it, and we automatically judge and say them are wicked, them too evil, them selfish, them are wicked. But there are many underlying issues to which we may not be privy. What are the signs, or are there any signs?
Are you hearing me?
Yes, I'm hearing you, Doc. You're hearing me?
Hello?
Dr. Thomas, are you hearing me?
I'm...
All right, what we're going to do is we're going to hang up and call him back and sort that line out. We're talking to Dr. Donovan Thomas. He is the president and founder of Choose Life International. He is also an author of the book titled Confronting Suicide, Helping Teens at Risk. We realize that persons are committing suicide, and according to the stats on which I came up, every 40 seconds, one person around the world commits suicide. Globally, suicide racks up a grim toll of close to 800,000 deaths each year. The Economic and Social Survey Jamaica 2019 showed that the total number of suicides for that year was 58. The total number of suicides in Jamaica for the year 2018 was 60. Locally, it is seen that more males committed suicide, with the percentage being 87.9%. And so we realize that also children are committing suicide, and we want to find out what are some of the signs for which we ought to look when we are confronted by this, or you may know someone. Oftentimes people will call you and tell you that they're feeling suicidal, and we are really stumped because we don't know what to do. We don't know what to say. We don't know what to recommend, because after all, most of us are not trained psychologists or psychiatrists. So, when somebody calls and says that, you too are shocked. You don't know what to say. Sometimes you don't have the right words. Maybe you see certain behavioral patterns, certain changes, and you're not really sure how to interpret these. And so Dr. Thomas is helping us navigate through all of these emotions. Dr. Thomas, you're back with us.
Yes, I am back with you.
Very well, sir. Thank you so very much. So we're talking about signs and, that we should look out for, Doc. If we see certain signs, are there any signs of, that there is a possibility? Because sometimes you hear some people say, boy, me never know, me never see nothing. Me never could tell say she depressed or nothing. Me never see no sign, no symptom, nothing at all. Or when this happen, why? I don't know. Is there anything, that we can look?
We have been to communities, in schools, in the workplace, in the church, where people have passed by suicide. And that's a crime. But most times we don't know the signs. So I'd like to suggest some of these signs. So every threat must be taken seriously.
Yes.
Making suicidal threat, this threat can be overt or it can be subtle. It can be, if I ever fail my chemistry exam, you're not going to see me again. Or it could be, if my parents ever break up this relationship, I'm going to kill myself. That is over. But sometimes it can be very subtle.
Yeah.
Like one young lady came to my office some years ago and she just waved goodbye from my secretary's desk. So I became curious and said to her, what, you going back to the States? She said, no. I said, Eastern Caribbean? No. Big broad smile. And then when I took the time to talk with her, her birthday was coming up.
Yes.
And she had a plan. A threat often moves to a plan. And the more detailed the plan, the closer the person is to the suicide act. The person knows a place, knows a time, and knows a method.
Yeah.
Is much more at risk than the person who just merely say, I feel like I want to kill myself.
Yes.
And let me just throw in here that it is okay to ask. So I noticed, have you been thinking about suicide? Up front, ask the question. Somebody said, that's the only way you're going to know. So making suicide threats, making the plans, frequently talking about death.
Yes.
A negative view of oneself, always talking about rotten inside and terrible and those kind of things. And maybe that something is going on. Then preparation for death, making plans to die. One young man, 3 weeks before he died by suicide, a 14-year-old, he took his Xbox from his parents' house and took it to his friend's house.
Yes.
Children prepare for death in various ways. Adults prepare for death in other ways. Teens prepare for death in other ways. Then feeling like a burden to others. Failure at school can trigger that. Sometimes parents going through financial challenges.
Yes.
And the children feel, I don't want to put my parents through this any longer. If they have failed in school, or even when their parents are not able to meet bills and the children hear them talking about it, sometimes they feel, I am the cause.
Yeah.
Sometimes they also feel that they are the reason for the breakup in marriage. So they take responsibility and they feel like they are a burden on the parents' marriage. Sometimes the marriage has broken up and the relationships have broken up and they just feel that they are responsible. Sometimes the teenagers and children cut themselves.
Yes.
And sometimes this cutting is not necessarily suicidal, but it could lead to suicide. So err on the side of being cautious.
Yes.
Many of our people go through pain, and part of emotional pain, and part of what they do is to use physical pain to distract them from the emotional pain. So a cut will distract me from the emotional pain, from the trauma of the rape I experienced many years ago, of being abused verbally by community and friends and etc., etc. Then we want to talk about a sense of hopelessness. What's going on in the lives of our teens? What's going on in the lives of our nation?
Yes.
Given the current pandemic, the loss of jobs, the not being able to go to school, not being able to see friends. We have seen on the media, we have seen on social media, we have gotten messages. A young man killed himself in Belize, and a father this video has been doing its round. A 12-year-old died by suicide. Father said COVID-19 took his son. It is not by the illness itself, but by the negative impact emotionally that he ended up dying. So this hopelessness, sometimes irritability and aggressiveness
Yes.
can be signs of somebody who's at risk of suicide.
Yes.
Drastic changes in behavior, in mood and behavior, being engaged in risky activities. And we want to think that suicide in Jamaica is really higher than the police reports, because some of those involvement in gang warfare and other risky activities could possibly be suicide. But instead of killing themselves, they put themselves
in harm's way.
In
in arms way because of the powerlessness and the hopelessness, and that sometimes is referred to as precipitous suicide.
Oh.
Then isolation or just feeling lonely.
Yes.
And just the possession of lethal means. We notice that the police and the security officers, the soldiers, sometimes the suicide takes place with them, among them, and sometimes even murder suicide.
Yes.
Relatively easy access
Yes.
to means of death like that. So those are some of the warning signs, and all of us, I say to parents, I say to counselors, I say to the community at large, use your eyes. What are you seeing?
Yes.
Are the children showing any signs of just lack of motivation?
Yes.
Is there lack of self-care going on?
Yes. Well, and Doc, when you say self-care, meaning, for example, you have a child who has withdrawn, a usually bubbly, extroverted child has now retreated to his or her room, retreated to his or her, just by him or herself. They're not bathing, not combing their hair, not taking care of themselves, don't want to go out with anyone, don't want to talk to anyone. They've just gone into, like a secluded, inside of themselves and not really talking to anyone at all. Parents should not ignore those signs.
Yes, and that leads me, Miss Kitty, to just say, use your nose.
Yes.
Because sometimes the self-care is so drastic that there's body odor.
Yes.
Unpleasant body odor. But I want to say to parents and caregivers and all of us as a country that we can use our voice, our speech to affirm people, to build them up, to speak life over them.
Yes.
There's a little story in the Bible when all that Paul did was a shout, do yourself no harm, we're all here. And that gave hope. All of us can step into some of this world and provide hope in the midst of the difficulties. It may mean that we have to be very practical sometimes. One young lady was about to kill herself, and because she couldn't find food for her children, and she was willing to trade the rope she was going to use to kill herself for some food for her children.
Yes.
So we have to be very practical. We have to be caring. We don't want people to abuse us, and we don't want to be robbed or so by persons who are pretenders. So we have to think carefully, choose wisely, and act deliberately.
We're talking to Dr. Donovan Thomas. He is the president and founder of Choose Life International and the author of Confronting Suicide, Helping Teens at Risk. Suicide is a real situation that many persons are dealing with. Many families have been touched by it. The murder suicide, I remember earlier this year and even last year, we saw much of that, much to our shock or dismay, and it broke a lot of hearts. But at the same time, we see these things happening. But how do we cauterize it? How do we stop it? How do we treat with it? How do we deal with it? And hopefully cut down on the number of persons taking their lives, and unfortunately sometimes even taking the lives of others before they take theirs. We're going to take a break and come back with Dr. Thomas to talk some more about suicide prevention.